We're going to talk about factors influencing false reports. When I asked you to read the article about false reports by End Violence Against Women International, the follow-up assignment was to summarize in 4 to 6 bullet points the actual facts versus myths about false reporting to refer to in future conversations or in training that you might provide. Part of the focus of this overall training is, yes, general education for ourselves, but as mentioned at the beginning, within this training, we're providing you with extra resources, supporting you to become your own agency's subject matter expert, and perhaps even to build or update protocol. We reviewed briefly the myths versus facts with regards to sexual assault. Of all the facts, the most basic one that sets the tone for everything as it relates to sexual assault investigations and prosecutions is the fact that too many people simply don't believe sexual assault reports are true. It's an international systemic problem. We're going to go into more depth about this simple but controversial fact in order to level the playing field through you. So let's talk about false reporting. When rigorous research is conducted based on this definition, estimates for the percentage of false reports converge around 2 to 8%. These are international statistics. A determination that a sexual assault report is false can only be made if the evidence establishes that no crime was completed or even attempted. This evidence will only be available after a thorough investigation, not after a preliminary investigation, and certainly not after the initial interview with the victim. So, if only 2 to 8% are false, then 92 to 98% are true or not false, period. This is the part right out of the gate that so many get wrong, and the cost is incalculable. And so we'll spend a little more time talking about this, but the article I've asked you to read lays it all out very professionally. We'll also talk in more depth later about the neurobiology of trauma and the why we all do what we do when we're under stress. But for now, let's look at why victims sometimes act in ways we associate with not being truthful. One of the most common reasons why victims alter or exaggerate the details of what happened is because they too are afraid of not being believed. This can be due to guilt and shame, and oddly, they too fall prey to the false narrative about real rape, that it is perpetrated by a stranger with a weapon or physical violence, that it is reported immediately, and that victims are hysterical. When we think about these dynamics, adding in what happens to our brains when exposed to trauma, it makes sense why victims might provide inconsistent, incomplete, or even untruths, like not identifying the suspect and reporting a stranger assault. In fact, none of these situations actually meets the criteria of a false report. Even if aspects of the victim's account are missing, exaggerated, or even false, that does not mean the sexual assault did not occur. So how do we deal with such dynamics? By trying to get in front of them. Understanding the facts around false reporting and the development of rapport is absolutely paramount. We have to create a safe and non-judgmental environment that encourages honesty, even for unflattering or illegal behavior. When I teach this course in person, one of the ways I highlight how difficult it is to talk to a stranger about their last sexual encounter is to ask them, the students, to do just that. I actually tried to fit this into our training format online, but it really has to be done in person to get the full effect, but I'll endeavor to describe how I did this. So what I do is I do this right before we're getting ready to have a break, and all the students know when the breaks come because they come on the hour. I announce to the class that we're going to do a quick exercise, then take a break, and we'll talk about the exercise after we come back from the break. I quickly tell the students to pair off, and I'll say, I'll walk out of the room for 5 minutes, and while I'm gone, I want each of you to relate to your partner, 2 minutes tops, in detail about your last sexual encounter. And then to make this seem like it really is an actual tasking, I tell them, I don't want you to mention any names, but somebody write this down, but I want to know the type of sex, vaginal, anal, and or oral, whether there was orgasm, ejaculation, and both what was pleasurable about the encounter and if there were any parts of it not pleasurable or satisfying. And then I start to walk towards the back of the class. I ask them to, hey, set your watches for 2-minute intervals. By now, I'm at the back of the class, and trust me, you can hear a pin drop. And I can feel the beginning of the discomfort. I can even see what I might call shock on a few faces. Of course, there's always someone who was ready to get started. So I'm able to use that to kind of lighten up the teaching point by interrupting that person and sort of making a joke about their willingness to jump right in. And the students get it. We then do go on a break, and upon their return, we process that ask a little. The ask is what we ask a lot from our victims, or that we do ask a lot from our victims. So it's our job to create a safe and respectful place in dialogue. Then, when an omission, inconsistency, or even untrue statement is suspected, we can respond by pointing out the issue gently and just asking for clarification. We simply need to seek to understand. Don't we, in fact, have to do this in all our relationships, or shouldn't we? It's entirely possible the victim made a mistake, or we misheard, or misunderstood what the victim was saying. Now, that happens all the time in my relationships. The appropriate time to ask about any possible discrepancy is after the victim has completed his or her description of what happened, not immediately when the issue arises, because this will interrupt the victim's narrative account. If issues remain that need more explanation, explain the conflicting information again gently and ask for the victim's help to make sense of it. Don't give any sense that you're being accusatory. It's equally as important to highlight the accuracy of the other details and thank them. I always conducted 3 interviews, a quick initial one depending on the circumstances. Then after they've received medical care, which includes an interview, and then after they've slept, we meet again and we get into more detail. I can easily be in that interview for 3 to 5 hours. I'll have the forensic examination results in hand, photographs if there are any that I can access at that time, or I have interviewed the person who conducted the exam. I never submitted my version of a summary of the interviews without having the person being interviewed go over that summary with me, because no matter how detailed I was, I always got a few things wrong or that were not clear enough. As soon as the victim pointed that out and we revisited the statement or statements, my own view of the events shifted some and we correct the narrative. In my own personal experience, a couple times I was interviewed by law enforcement in a civilian capacity, even when I was a working agent, and I went back to get a copy of the report, there were always facts wrong. And not simply nuances. It's both irritating and disappointing because that is now a record. So let's talk about when false reporting does happen. Potential indicators of a false report. They likely don't name a suspect. They deny drug or alcohol use. Report penile vaginal penetration, that a weapon or physical violence was used. They could even have injuries. And they will likely report they resisted. The irony, interestingly, is these potential indicators mimic the stereotypical characteristics of real rape. Real rape. Research shows most cases of false reporting are not vengeful, to get back at a boyfriend or cover up a pregnancy or an affair or other behavior, although this can certainly be the case. Either way, you have to conduct a complete investigation to prove the negative, just like we do with any other crimes. In the next training module, you'll be introduced to blind reporting, also referred to as alternate or anonymous or third-party or non-investigative reporting. The military refers to it as restricted reporting. The creation of this type of reporting protocol is a response to the fact that so many sexual assault victims do not report, so they don't receive medical and psychological care, and valuable DNA and other evidence is lost. This type of reporting does not initially trigger a law enforcement response, but you could get a report later where the initial report and evidence was captured this way. Often family justice centers around the nation may have a nonprofit group who sits with the center or is a referral from the center for this type of reporting. You'll be provided a protocol development guide for creating such a response system within your jurisdiction if you don't have one already. I'll close with a series of photographs of the monument quilt. This project is part of an international response after the Me Too movement to increase awareness to the fact that 92 to 98% of reported cases are legitimate. The Monument Quilt Project was created by and for survivors. It's a collection of over 3,000 stories by survivors of sexual and intimate partner violence, either written, painted, or stitched onto red fabric. The last showing of the quilt culminated at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in 2019, and was the only time that the quilt was viewed in its entirety.